All right. Welcome to the Ethical Algorithm Podcast. I'm your host, Gavin, and we're here with Elio. And today we're going to talk about AI. Has it gone too far? Specifically, or not.
We're not far enough.
Or not far enough. This one's going to be a fun episode, especially because we're going to be talking about AI clones and what some people have been doing with AI recently, ethically and unethically. And then we're going to be talking about AI hype and AI winters. What are the things that we can learn from the past two major AI winters? And are we headed in the direction of a new AI winter based off of all of the hype? So, Elio, let's go ahead and get started with the clones.
So, you're just reminding me. I had an old article on the psychological impact of this because we haven't touched on this in a few episodes now. Mm-hmm. But yeah, this idea, and let's make sure we're on the same page, the idea of taking a person and making a clone of them so you can talk to the clone as if you were talking to that person.
Yeah.
And this is literally straight out of Black Mirror, which I just like to remind any programmers, it's not an instruction manual. It is a warning. Please do not build things in Black Mirror. What was the torment nexus? There was a joke about that. You know, hey, we just built the torment nexus based on the book Don't Build the Torment Nexus by a famous sci-fi author. And it's just like the whole industry is like, oh, look, we built the torment. It's like, please stop.
Stop building the thing.
Please understand.
I actually really like that episode of Black Mirror just because I can see where some people could use that in a healthy way, but I can also see where some people would use that in an unhealthy way.
To be clear for our listeners, you're talking about Be Right Back, right? From season 2?
The Black Mirror episode where...
Just for anyone who wants to look it up.
Well, it was a good episode. It was like really emotionally impactful too because the lady, she lost her husband and found this service, or a friend told her about this service of, it'll scrape all of your social media, it'll scrape all of your text messages, all of your phone calls, voicemails, and it'll create essentially an AI clone of your husband that you can then talk to. And so she's like, no, this is crazy. This is absolutely ridiculous. And then she found out she was pregnant. And she's like, holy shit, I got to tell somebody. I got to tell him.
And that's the psi. And then the phi part of it was they started that and it was just text messages. Yep. And then in the first 15 minutes, she gets would you like to try the new beta test of having like a fully, an android body that looks exactly like your husband that you can actually talk to and hold? And that's the fiction part.
Yeah. So when we talk about ethics on this, the first obvious piece, and we're already seeing this with the deep fakes and with the nude deep fakes, is
big time.
When you're making a clone of somebody else, you need to make sure that you have their consent and permission, because right now people are making clones of other people without their consent, without their permission. And one of the articles that we actually had on deck for tonight to research was talking about using kids inadvertently.
Yeah, talking about Facebook and a lot of these, people love sharing baby pictures. And again, social media, assuming social media is run as a decentralized service where you have ultimate say over your data, is a great thing. I think there's a lot of value to be able to put stuff out. Because the problem is, if you call people then you're asking for their time. And so you might call them for bigger stuff, but you don't want to call everyone once a day. That's not really going to work out. And so there's this neat in-between of being able to just kind of put a postcard out there for whoever of your friends or connections wants to see it and just say, hey, this thing happened. Not a huge thing, but for those who might be interested, hey, look, this is what happened today.
Here's my life update.
I think that's a really potentially valuable thing. I don't think the concept is horrible. There are some psychological things that we can save for later, but I think that overall, the concept is good. It's the implementation and the people or organizations that control that make it really disturbing. But that's exactly the problem, is how do you make money doing that? Well, you throw advertising in there. And this is where we've seen the warping of social media. So instead of just seeing a nice chronological feed of, hey, here's what happened today, and two big things we've seen is the first thing was repacing your timeline, where they want you to be on the site as much as possible. Mm-hmm. So in the real world, most data is bursty. There are times when there are big bursts of activity and then lulls where there's nothing. And that doesn't keep you on the site. In fact, some of these burstiness, right, is predictable. Like sporting events. If you run a website that does stuff around sporting, you're going to have
you'll see, like,
burstiness
the
around
live tweets
right?
going on.
Games. If you run a power grid in England right by tea time every day, just a huge spike in power demand as everyone turns on the kettles to warm the water up for tea. So some of this is very predictable, and some of it's based on, working hours of the day. Others is less predictable, but either way, they don't want that burstiness. They want a constant drip feed of stuff to keep your attention. And so this was the first thing that social media companies did is they reordered all of the updates, and they would get these bursts and they would just slowly drip them out. So you get notifications constantly throughout the day,
Right.
rather than when they're actually happening. And it's not horrible. It's not good, but it's a subtle type of manipulation to mess with you. And then the other thing we've seen, which is much more explicit, has been just advertising, right? Paid posts. Pay to reach more people, which is not really a healthy thing if you're just talking to friends, and is clearly aimed at businesses. But now I can pay money to force what I want you to see in front of your eyes rather than what you actually want to see.
Yeah, I can't tell you how tired I am of seeing the promotions for LinkedIn Premium. And I was like, the only people that buy LinkedIn Premium are recruiters. I'm not a recruiter.
Yeah.
Because there's no benefit. I've gotten it for free, and there's no benefit to it.
Yeah.
I didn't even use it at all.
Oh, yeah.
And it was kind of ridiculous because I was trying to figure out, hey, I have a month-long free trial of this. How can I use this? And I can't.
Yeah.
And
I didn't
so
even click the free trial because
it's not worth it.
Microsoft is pushing harder and harder. And now one
yeah.
thing that really pisses me off, I've had to change my personal policy with LinkedIn, because now if you want to put a little note like, why am I reaching out to you? Because a lot of times just reading that note will tell you whether it's a legit connection or garbage.
It's usually garbage.
Right. And now you get like 2 or 3 a month if you're not paying.
Yeah.
Can't even put a note.
Yeah.
So everything looks like garbage, and it's making the site a lot less usable. So I hope they reverse that decision. I doubt they will.
There's no incentive to reverse it. They're going to keep it the way that it is because you're not the customer. You're the product.
Yeah.
The customers are the recruiters and the people that are paying for
And yeah, I was
access
going to say,
to
unless
your
I'm paying
inbox.
for premium, then I'm the customer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Although I'm still treated like the product, which is why I won't pay them.
Exactly. But in line of AI clones, the one that was really interesting, because you shared this YouTube video by Drew Gooden talking about the current state of AI and how people are using AI to essentially create like these no-face YouTube channels and short-form content.
Yeah.
Sorry. Put my hands everywhere.
I'm the Italian here. Come on. Only one of us gets to talk with our hands.
No, I'm just moved up. See, now I'm bumping the camera. I'm just moved all the way over to the camera. That's the problem here, but that's all good. Yeah, so talking about these short form videos where basically people are just, oh, hey, let me find like a story on Wikipedia, and then I'm going to pump it through ChatGPT. It's going to write a script. I'm going to use a robotic voice from 11 Labs, and then I'm going to, put a stupid little caption on it, and that's going to be my content, quote unquote, and then I'm going to hit 1 million subscribers because of that. And there's a few videos that do that, and there's a lot of videos that do that, and there's a lot of people that have the incentive to make this crap content.
I think the new term, there's actually a term for this called slop.
Yeah, it's just slop. It's just hot garbage. Again, that ties into what we were talking about the other week with dead internet theory. But yeah, it was also, I highly recommend people watch this video, but one of the things that really caught my attention that I want people to focus on is how especially public personalities are being cloned by these AI algorithms. So you can have somebody like Mr. Beast, and so basically they took all of his videos and podcasts and content that he's made, created a quote-unquote clone of Mr. Beast, and then this is a Mr. Beast that you can talk to as though you're talking to the real person. So it just takes that parasocial relationship up to the next level.
Yeah, except it's not actually him, and it's right. It's going to have all the issues that large language models currently have.
Right.
Which is, to get back to the Black Mirror thing, like that's what eventually happens. Spoilers if you haven't watched it. She really gets more and more frustrated because her husband is too, quote, perfect, right? He never says no. He always does exactly what she wanted. And she gets so frustrated, she starts abusing and mistreating this android version of her husband because it starts feeling more and more fake and less fulfilling.
Yeah.
And that's besides the psychological study that I found a few months back, which was talking about having these clones can prevent proper healing and closure. Like it can actually do psychological damage to you.
I can see that.
And there's that aspect. And then the second aspect is these are not like a practice one for a real relationship. These are teaching you to be a shitty partner, right? They're teaching you that they're just there to be subservient to you, that they are there to always answer however you want them to answer, Like, they are setting extremely bad habits that if you internalize these will sabotage every relationship you'll have for the rest of your life.
Well, and think about the stalker superfans, and where this is going to reinforce their idea that, oh, this famous person who has no idea that I exist actually knows me and loves me and cares about me. And so that's just going to crank up that worldview to the 11, you know? And so that's going to cause issues.
And there's one other aspect there too, is they tend to go sexual much sooner than they should.
Well, that's some of them, but those aren't the ones that we're talking about in this case. In this case, it's more about the consent. So again, as a public personality, somebody can now just clone you, right?
Yeah.
They can just clone, Jenna Ortega or whomever and say like, oh, okay, this is now a product, pay me $10 a month or $20 a month, and you can talk to Jenna Ortega. And it's like, all right, well, but she's not making any money off of this. She never consented to any of this. Like, who the hell are you to clone a human being in that respect? When I'm saying clone, like air quotes, quote unquote. And so, that's very
I don't know
problematic.
if you need the air quotes, though. I mean, this in a digital world, this is just as good as actually cloning the person.
Yes and no, and I don't want to make it sound like it's exact. So it's
no, I'm not saying it's like them, but I'm saying,
and that's why I do
the infraction and the offense. It's the same thing. If you're predatorily making money off of this, it's just as bad.
Yeah,
right. That's what I'm saying.
The other thing is the kids. Like, even though there's, we have this idea that the industry is supposed to self-regulate, and
show me one industry that has ever worked for more than a year or two. Just one. Any industry, take your pick.
There's a few that have self-regulated, but again, like people forget that also required a significant amount of like government intervention, and then you start talking about weaponized policy, where it was like Amazon and Walmart that were pushing for $15 an hour minimum wage to push out their competition because they could afford it and their competition couldn't. And sales tax.
Because each state has different sales tax. So Amazon's got a whole building full of people to figure out the sales tax on every product. But if you're a little online seller that's like 10 people in the entire company, really? Can you still compete?
You don't have the resources. So you get some of that weaponized policy or like the over-regulation pushed by the big guys, so that it reduces the barrier or increases the barrier of entry.
Regulatory capture is a powerful and dangerous thing.
But when we're looking at some of the self-regulation that is, they're trying to push out for some of this AI, they have these anti-AI scraping rules, right? Where you're not supposed to be able to scrape certain content, or you can put something in the robots.txt file and it informs, AI scrapers like, hey, don't scrape this content. And companies like Perplexity are being sued because they've been violating that. Again, it's not a law, but it's, hey, you're using somebody else's intellectual property rights in order to push your own content. You're stopping me, like it was Forbes that was doing one of the lawsuits. Amazon's doing an investigation on them. But Forbes is saying like, hey, you're using our content without giving us the advertising dollars that we use to create this content. And so that's essentially another form of theft or piracy. But now it's it's B2B piracy. And so people are more willing to kind of accept that as like, oh, yeah, piracy is fine, except when it's companies doing it against other companies. So regardless, this is why I'm getting to that point, is because when we're talking about kids, they found unlisted YouTube videos that are being put into training data. And then models, because what they do is they iterate on the models. So anything that's been in the training data will always be in the training data. So even if they take it out of the next iteration of the training data, the model never forgets. So they have photos and images of kids that are in these AI-generated images, AI-generated videos, and things like that. And so that is illegal, or at least it should be.
And it shows people that unlisted does not mean private.
Right.
I think people have forgotten that.
I did a little bit of research when I was in grad school talking about usable privacy and security. And oddly enough, LinkedIn was actually the company that we did some research on, talking about why is, so the general concept, because it's always important to understand what this lens is. The general concept is, why is privacy difficult and why is it misunderstood? And the reason is because there are certain things that you and I might consider to be private, but according to the terms of service of a company, when they say private, it may not necessarily mean that it's private. So for example, in LinkedIn, they had 3 settings at the time. They had public, private, and unlisted. And so public was, you can find this profile on Google. Private was anybody with a LinkedIn profile, which by the way is free, can search your name and find you. And then unlisted is where you're completely off of LinkedIn. But that also means that you can't use the search feature unless you put yourself on at least the private plan.
Interesting. And
So
those are flipped on LinkedIn. Interesting.
It's weird because when somebody would think of private, they would think, oh, completely unlisted. And no, that's not what that means.
Yeah.
So
Because on SmugMug, which is a photo sharing app, that is how you'd think. Private means just you need an actual password.
Yeah.
And unlisted just means you need the little special URL with the little junk on the end. So that's like every other site does it that way. So it's interesting. LinkedIn, I would consider that a dark pattern on LinkedIn's case.
I don't think it crosses the threshold into a dark pattern because they're not hiding anything. It's just.
But they've confusingly named it in opposition to every other website.
I wouldn't even say that they've confusingly named it because I don't think that the onus is on them for interpreting the naming. I think it's on the people who are using it.
I think
there is a threshold.
I think when there's a standard and the rest of the web is.
But there isn't. That's the thing. There is no standard.
Okay.
So that's why I don't think
I would say there's ad hoc standards.
There is a public understanding of what certain words mean, but that does not mean it is a standard. We're doing lawyer speak.
True.
We're doing lawyer speak.
Technically correct. No. Correct.
But that's the level of detail and precision that you need to get into when you're having these kinds of discussions.
But the general public never will, and that's to me that is the essence of a dark pattern.
That's a different problem. That's a different problem.
You use the gap in perception between that precision and the actual public perception. That's what dark patterns do, is they allow you to manipulate how the public behaves by using that gap to your advantage.
There's a certain threshold before it gets to what would be considered a dark pattern. It's not a dark pattern if you don't understand what a company says when they're saying things. It's a dark pattern when the company purposefully makes it indecipherable. So for example, try to cancel your Amazon account. Where would you even find that?
Are you sure you don't want to not maybe uncancel, right? Like, triple, quadruple negatives.
Yeah,
like
you can do quadruple negatives. You can hide. You can
there.
hide the Amazon cancel button in like a setting that's not under settings. You put it under personalization.
Most of them these days, the current, I don't even know if I call that a dark pattern, just basically fraud. Is sign up is really easy. Click here, right?
Yep.
And then cancel, you have to call some number that's staffed by like 2 people on the other side of the world. So the wait times are like 3 hours, and you have to then go through all this stop loss bullshit.
Oh, dude, try canceling a gym membership sometimes.
Yeah.
That's a dark pattern.
Yeah.
Well, that's just all right. Well, you have to come in and then sign a letter, and it's like, why? I bought this online. I should be able to cancel it online. Well, that's not how we do things. It's like, well, what do you need me to do? Close my account? Like, come on.
Yeah.
So,
there are temporary credit cards that you might take a hit on your credit report, but
that's why they do
ACH
transfers. They only take from bank accounts.
Oh, sketchy, super sketchy.
I wouldn't call it sketchy. I understand why they do it, but again,
I understand why they do it. It doesn't mean it's okay.
It puts you. It's not in and of itself necessarily abusive, but it does put you in an area where if you take advantage of people's trust, it can be abusive. So there's degrees to this. Anyways, this is why I'm in favor of this idea of the right to be forgotten. So if I had a Facebook when I was like 13 years old and I decided, 10 years later that I wanted to cancel it, I should be able to cancel it. I should be able to delete everything that's on Facebook. But unfortunately, now that's not possible. We don't have comprehensive privacy laws in the United States. And so Facebook has already announced that they're going to take data as far back as 2007 on both Facebook and Instagram, and they're going to train their own AI systems off of that. So anything that I posted when I was 13 years old and I got really excited or I got really mad at, somebody in a video game and I posted on Facebook and then turn around and that's going to be in an AI training data forever.
And backups. And this is the problem. So this is something that I think generally is not understood. The intelligence community understands this when it comes to data classification, but most people don't. This idea of the right to be forgotten, and Alan Woods has written extensively about this on LinkedIn, and we've had some personal discussions about it. Once data's out there, it's out there. You're never clawing it back.
Yeah, it's written in ink.
And even if you're in the European Union, where you can have GDPR that legally mandates right to be forgotten, just like CCPA in California, the problem with that is, so it's in their database. How is their database replicated? Right? Are you sure you got all the little pieces of that data? Probably not. Do they have backups? A competent company should have several levels of backups. They should have, backups, live backups. They might have multiple data centers. They should have warm backups that can be brought online quickly that are not normally accessible in case of a major outage. And they should have offsite backups at something like Iron Mountain that really, like when you clicked, please delete all my stuff, really, did they call Iron Mountain just for you and said, oh, dig through all those DAT tapes, that mountain of DAT tapes, load them into a secured vehicle, bring them so we can like rewrite all those DAT tapes for you? No, they didn't. So, and that's just that company. That's not even talking about who they sold that data to, which partners. Did it leak onto the dark web either because of a breach or because someone else got a copy?
Too, because
right?
once somebody else downloads it, and we've seen this with there was that Discord bot scheme where they were scraping all sorts of private messages, or not private, but they were scraping all sorts of messages from Discords via bots, and so that became a whole data dump. Like Discord can't be responsible for that.
Disney just had a major, like the breaches this week, right? They lost a terabyte plus of data from Slack. So we'll see if they pay. We'll see if the data gets deleted. But we might learn about all of the movie plans for the next 10 years because it's all in there. They got all of the internal Slack. There was that other breach. Where was that? I forget which breach this one was. It was 10 billion records. I don't think that was in the U.S. There's 8 billion people on the planet. So 10 billion records is like everybody's records that actually use the service, right? Like there have been some insane and AT&T lost all of their stuff. Now, supposedly they paid like $300,000 to have the data deleted. Mm-hmm. We'll see if it actually is deleted because a lot of times when you see breaches today, people will get the data and then they will sell the data and then they will go ahead and continue like leaking the data and set up a dark web site where you can then search through the data that wasn't deleted so they can make even more money. So once the data's out there, like I really wish everyone would internalize. I was talking to a friend who runs a privacy workshop, and it's like, no, I mean, that's awesome that we're doing this. Mm-hmm. That's awesome that finally people care about privacy to some degree. It's a little late. Like most of everyone's data is already out there. We can try to protect some of the newer data from leaking, but anything that already exists that's already been breached, like it's just, you're screwed. You can't undo that. There's no undo here. Which is why the fact that we've not had good policies, I don't think most people realize the damage that's been done and can't be undone at this point.
I think people realize it. It's just, again, what can you do about it? It does remind me of a story. I don't know if you remember this from like 10 plus 15 years ago. There was a meme that was going around, and it was talking about like the plastic surgery out in South Korea. And so I found... it was just random, the algorithm works in mysterious ways. And so it was like some random like interview of the lady that this was actually about. But there was a picture. She was a model. And so one of her earliest modeling gigs, it was for plastic surgery or something like that. I don't even think it was related to plastic surgery. Yeah, it was for plastic surgery. And so it was basically her, a guy, and so they were husband and wife, and then they had 3 kids.
Okay.
She was even saying like, yeah, the kids didn't look the way they did in the final picture. They did their Photoshop, and it was for an advertisement. And so I only thought it was going to be a one-time thing. It was going to be for an advertisement. But then somebody copied that photo, pasted it in, I think it was in China where it first started. They pasted it in Chinese and Japanese social media, where the caption was basically reading that this lady got plastic surgery and lied to her husband about it. And so some people might remember this as kind of a meme that happened again, like 15 or so years ago, but it destroyed her career. She could no longer model because once the rumors were out there, the rumors were out there. And then how do you prove that somebody didn't get plastic surgery? Also, the story was completely fake because she was just a model that was a photo shoot for an advertisement. But again, false information spreads around the world before, the truth puts its shoes on.
Yeah.
So
here, to paraphrase the famous quote.
Exactly. So here we have a situation where even if we had, in some cases, comprehensive privacy laws where a company, you posted something to a company's website, and then you said, hey, I would like that deleted from the website. Cool, it's deleted from the website. But then somebody has an archive. People have, Internet Archive is a thing. People have personal archives, and so they'll pull information off of that. They'll make memes out of that. That's why we're seeing so many remixes of things from the 80s and 90s.
Data brokerage, all that data
brokerage.
That's the thing. These services like, delete me from all the data brokers. Okay, that's cute. That's not actually going to work because As soon as that broker gets your information, they're selling it to partners for data enrichment.
And it's all
so
automated. So
as
it's
you
the second it happens.
as you
Yeah.
chase this around, it gets deleted from here. It's already over there. As it deletes from there, it's already over there. Like you're trailing that information. You'll never catch up with where it is. You'll never actually get rid of it. So I think those services are a huge waste of money. They're if anything, they're moderately reducing your exposure. Best case scenario.
I still think that it does something, but I wouldn't use a service like that personally. I wouldn't use a service like that simply because I don't think that it's going to be effective. And then it might be, and I've noticed this because I got a new insurance agent, and it's not because I changed insurance companies. It's because my old insurance agent left and was replaced by somebody else. And so that new insurance agent, I know because I'm getting certain pieces of mail that have the wrong information, and they're the only ones that have that information wrong. And I'm getting advertisements. And so it's like, okay, so let me get this right. I completely clean slate all of the data brokers, just assuming I can do that. Yeah. All of the data brokers, my data is erased. I'm completely gone from the internet. As soon as I sign up for one more thing, it's back. And then I got to pay for that service all over again. Yeah.
And it's back. And not only that, it's you go into a store and they're taking pictures. They're using facial rec. You go to Disneyland, Epic. What was that, 10, 15 years ago? The Electronic Privacy Information Center broke the story that Disneyland is using facial rec to enforce people not sharing passes. And I actually went, man, that was like years ago. That was like 8, 10 years ago at this point. And it was taking too long to get in. And I kind of just made the snide remark. I'm like, what is the facial rec not working? She's like, yeah, we're having problems right now. I'm just like, oh my God. I didn't think they'd admit it.
What's funny is that stuff doesn't bother me. That stuff doesn't bother me because it's like walking through a casino. I've been in the back room of casinos. Yeah. I know what information they have, and I know how detailed. Like, you think 4K is detailed. Yeah, no, these people from a mile away can count the pimples on your face. It is absolutely ridiculous.
And the problem there is that used to stay in the casino, right? But now you're seeing this data sold between everyone who's collecting it, which is damn near everyone at this point. Physical stores, online stuff, it's all being sold, it's all being enriched. And so when we talk about making clones, the data to make a clone of you is out there. Unless you live a very, very secluded, insanely restricted life with ridiculously good OPSEC, which is very hard to do. Yeah. Ask, Osama bin Laden about that. Oh, that's right, he's dead.
No. Ask the GeoGuessers.
Yeah. What's his name? What was the guy? Shia LaBeouf. His whole little war with the Unity flag.
With 4chan,
Yeah, that's a great example of just people, just for the
people
lulls.
Can find you. People can find you from a picture of like the wood grain on a restaurant table.
Yeah, it is insane how good people are getting. So, yeah, it's disturbing because a lot of people, and this is one thing we didn't cover yet, they put pictures of their kids on Facebook because, right, that's partly what you want to do is keep up with the relatives. And those are out there now. And it's going to be really hard to stop people from using those to train models and do cloning and whatnot, like age progression, et cetera. Like, there's really no limit. And what's interesting is the enforcement is catching up because I think the recent thing, there's a lot of high schoolers. It's so easy. High schoolers are doing deep fakes and especially nude deep fakes.
There was some that were arrested because of
15 in Spain were arrested. And that's the latest case. There have been some in the U.S. There have been some in Australia. Like, there's going to be a lot more. So this, that's the most disturbing iteration, but yeah, I mean, cat's out of the bag. This is done. It's too late to stop. Yeah. The question is, how do we deal with this moving forward? And I think the sane way would be to be less, psycho about, like, especially nudity. Like, if we just changed that as a culture and had a healthier attitude toward nudity, like being in the military, I was always very, like, I like my privacy a lot, and having to shower with other people was not a thing I enjoyed. Like, I remember finally in Fort Gordon getting, a bathroom to ourselves again. Like, all of us shared that room. Like, oh my God, I could lock the door when I take a shower. Not that anything was happening. It just having the privacy is so nice. And, but anyway, like, you just learn it's not a big deal. There's other bigger stuff to worry about. And like, one dude was PCSing, he's streaking down the hall. And that would be a huge scandal in the civilian world. And it's just like, oh, yeah, that sounds like him. Yeah. And everyone just goes back to what they're doing. But that's unrealistic.
There's also consent in, like, public life that you need to think about. Like, consent to not be seen naked and consent to not see naked people.
I would rather we have that. But like I said, cat's out of the bag. So it's going to be really interesting to see how we deal with this because we're going to be forced to.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what it's going to look like. I know that there's going to be some laws and regulations. Again, they're 10 years behind the times, and especially with the technology that evolves so quickly, like that's going to be real difficult to do. But let's go ahead and take a quick break, and then we'll hop back in and we'll talk about AI hype.
Sounds good.
All right. Awesome.
All right. Welcome back for the second half of the ethical algorithm. So, what do we want to cover in this half?
I like how I tell you we're going to do the welcome back, and then you're like, and I'm just going to stop there. Anyways, so this one's really exciting. We were talking about AI hype and how that leads into AI winters. There was an article that was really interesting that you sent me kind of talking about AI winters and where we might be today. It was called the Grand Unified AI Hype Cycle. And it had essentially 12 steps that each of the AI winters went through. I had some opinions on it, but before
you have more than me. I'm curious to hear them.
Yeah, before we get into that, and the reason why I wanted to introduce that is because the whole article itself was basically talking about the hype and how overhype might cause the next AI winter. To understand it, let's talk about the AI hype and kind of where we are right now. So the article that we were going to read was, I will pile drive you if you talk about AI again. Did you read that article? You sent me the audio that was like the dramatic reading.
I started reading it, and then like a day or two later, someone came out with a dramatic reading, and I ended up listening to that instead. It was pretty good. It was solid.
Do a quick recap for us.
So the gist of the article, and I do not want to deprive anyone, but the gist is that this guy's an actual data scientist, and he starts establishing, like, I actually work in this. I've actually built some of these things. I'm not the smartest guy. I don't know everything about this, but I know more than most. I can actually build these systems from first principles. And then he gets into all of the things people are saying and just why this hype is so damaging and dangerous. Like, if next person who says this, and he has all these great euphemisms for pile driving someone, just picking them up.
Yes, I will effing pile drive you. They swear a lot more. Yeah, they got a lot of sarcasm.
An impromptu chiropractic adjustment or so. I can't remember all that. It's wonderful just for those. Yeah. But he talks about how it's these LLMs, and this is true. I mean, just take a small step back. There has been a tech hype cycle for at least the last decade, if not, well, ever since Silicon Valley got popular. And we had blockchain, and that was going to change the internet and change the world and everything. And even 10 plus years in, it really hasn't been used for much other than illicit, funds transfers. Yeah. And then we had ICOs, and then those had about 2 years, and then people kind of caught on. Most of those, like almost 100% of them were scams, basically. And then we had NFTs, and those were going to be, right? And then that very quickly took less than 2 years for people to figure out, wait a minute. And then now we're still doing this with AI. And there was also the amazing thing is LK99, the room temp superconductor was like 2 months, right? And it blew up, and suddenly everyone's like, oh, forget AI, room temp semiconductors, we finally have them. And then other scientists actually tried to replicate, and none of them could even get close to replication. So to me, that was incredible. Like the contraction of the hype cycle from, years to like 2 months.
Yeah.
But we're still going on the AI, and there's more and more articles I'm starting to see. Was it Goldman Sachs, I think, had a whole big PDF about lots of investment but little return.
Yeah.
And they're not the only ones. I'm seeing more and more of these. And that's, I think, mentioned in the paper. It might have been a different article that went more into this. But the people with the money funding all this research are starting to say, wait a minute, how much is this costing? What are we getting for this?
Right.
Wait a minute.
It's the what are we getting for this? And
yeah.
In that article, it also talked about, like, hey, it's the business people that are trying to push the hype. And the reason why the business people are trying to push the hype is because it gets the customers excited. It gets the investors excited.
Gets the money coming in.
I mean, heck, you even look at startup culture 5 years ago, not even 10 years ago, 5 years ago. The startup culture was basically like everybody wants the next unicorn. Everybody wants the next Twitter. Everybody wants the next Instagram. Everybody wants the next WhatsApp. Everybody wants the next Snapchat. And you name it. That's what people are trying to invest in. And so when they hear AI, they're just building AI tools to build AI tools. So about 5 years ago, what was happening? It's probably a little more than 5 years ago. No, it was about 5 years ago.
Okay.
About 5 years ago, what was happening is there were all these really shitty startups, and it didn't matter what they were doing. No, seriously.
More than 5. That goes back 30 years. It
goes back much further, but like it kind of hit an inflection point about 5 years ago.
Okay.
Like, let me tell you about this conversation I had with somebody. Have you seen Hunger Games?
I read the books. I didn't watch the movie.
All right, cool. So you know how there are sponsors in the Hunger
Yeah.
Games, and they can donate money to
Yeah.
drop off like a little
Get
gift
little extra
basket,
gifts and
little
weapons
extra
and stuff.
gift.
Yeah.
So this startup, they were getting a Series B funding too, by the
Okay.
way. This startup, it was that, but for Twitch streamers. So imagine playing Fortnite or PUBG or Roblox or whatever, and then you can pay money to drop a little gift
I
thing.
remember. I don't remember the name, but I remember this. Yes.
And I'm just like, that
Yeah.
breaks competition play. Nobody, like the gamers aren't going to want to play under that. But they were getting they had a Series A, they were running out of money, they had a Series B, they had no product to show for it, and it was just, that was the tech startup. Now imagine being the CEO of that tech startup and you're paying yourself like $200,000 a year plus equity in the company. You don't even need the equity in the company. You could sell the equity in the company for extra salary.
Sell it before it drops back down
sell
again.
it before it drops back down again, and then you made your salary.
Yeah.
And you made no value out of it. And so we saw a lot of that in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's been happening for the last 20, 30 years. But again, like about 5 years ago or so, it hit this inflection point. And so we're seeing the same thing with all these AI tools. As soon as AI came out, we're seeing all these businesses like, oh, AI is going to do this, AI is going to do that. Devin, for example,
Yes.
where it's gonna replace your software developers. And it's like, dude,
I watched. I think we talked about.
Yeah, we
two
talked
of those
about
videos.
that. We talked about that video where it was basically breaking down how Devin's a bit of a scam.
A bit. A lot.
We have the Rabbit M1. We have
The humane pen.
the Humane Pin, and so but there are practical use cases. There are successful startups that are using these AI technologies. Those aren't it.
And that's the gist of this article, right? Of
Yeah.
the grand unified theory of AI hype cycles. He talks about how going back to the 70s was the first AI wave. And there's 13 steps. I cannot do this from memory, but you basically find some novel technology that takes too much compute for normal people to use. You start showing some results. Some research thing says, "Oh wow, look at this," and it does a cool thing. And then everyone gets really excited. People start throwing money into it. I forget a whole bunch of the other steps. And then
generally, it starts with researchers. They start to show some promise, and then off of that, people are starting to give investment in dollars, and then they're starting to try and commercialize it. And then once they commercialize it, they realize that it doesn't actually do all the things that they wanted it to do or that they sold to the customers to do. And so there's a dial back in resources, and then the project itself dies.
But the interesting thing about this article is it's not that tech goes away. That technique, technology, algorithm, whatever, stays in practice. It just is relegated to the things that it actually does. Instead of solving every single problem. And again, one of the articles in there, one of the second or third hype cycles and winters that they talk about was the fuzzy logic. It's still used in industrial control systems and rice cookers. Like fuzzy logic wasn't a failure. It just wasn't AGI. It was, a neat thing that it's a tool to use in certain places, and it works really well in those places, and that's it. And it's the same thing I think we're finding with LLMs, is like they are a tool. They are very useful in a handful of scenarios. They are not generally intelligent. I saw a whole thing on the theory of mind and all this. No, they don't have any of that, right? These things are useful if you need certain things, but if you overrun their capabilities, you're going to get real disappointed. It's going to go real bad.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, so I took issue with that unified theory of AI hype at first.
Yeah.
And the reason why I took issue with it is because they were kind of cherry picking where they were getting their information from. That's not the right way to put it. I didn't like that they used the rabbit as an example. The rabbit, I mean, and there's talk about the company itself being a scam before they even created this product.
CoffeeZilla did an amazing takedown. It was like a cryptocurrency scam or something.
It was like a crypto or like another blockchain kind of thing.
Yeah, and now they've pivoted to AI. So it's like, oh, shocker. The guys that ran the first scam are running another scam. Who knew?
Exactly. And so I would call that cherry picking. There are examples of applications where the LLMs have actually been useful and people are buying this stuff. I tested an application that has a $1 million ARR. It does provide value. It looks at I can't talk about what it actually looks at. It looks at public and private information.
Want me to make a beep sound?
No. It looks at public and private information in a certain sector, and it uses that in order to allow people to chat with that data and kind of get an understanding of how it works. And so it's kind of like chat with your own data, except, again, you're using it for specific sectors, which is something that people will use. People will use this in those areas and it's useful. And so that's them providing value. And so this is where they're getting $1 million ARR after like what?
Yeah.
They put it together in a weekend.
And I think another example like that for you is I've seen models that can take human language and turn it into SQL. And I've seen, right, other models, same kind of thing where I need this. Give me an example of a command line, because there was this amazing website that I found that Intel LLMs was the best thing I'd seen. And you'd give it a command line, even a complex pipeline, and it would break down the whole command, look it up in the man pages, and draw these little lines and show you what each flag was doing out of the docs. And that was really cool. I think it was like shell explain or something. No, explain shell. So that was super cool. But now you can pop that into an LLM and say, explain this command, or even better, you can say, hey, how would I do this? Now, you have to double check, because a lot of times it will invent, like I asked it, how would I trace a redirect chain with curl? And it said follow redirect, like it added that flag. And I look
dash follow redirect,
right, and I look up and it's like curl doesn't actually have that flag.
But that's the benefit of RAG, is you can give it the curl man pages and then ask, how do I do a redirect? And it'll look that up, and so it reduces the chance of hallucinations.
Yeah, and there's some other interesting research I've been following on other ways to reduce hallucinations. There was that medical paper we talked about on a previous episode where it does verbatim quoting, and it actually shows you where to look this up. So again, these things, there is utility now if you use it properly.
Oh, yeah.
And I think the article's spot on, because they're not arguing that AI is useless in any of these iterations with any of the winters. They're arguing we see the same cycle. And I think this is not AI. I think this is a larger just phenomenon we've seen with funding. And, you know, it's ironic that it's Silicon Valley, because it really is the valley of Silicon games. Like, Silicon Valley's perfect. I hope that gets popular. But, you know, that's the cycle, is you make a lot of noise. And I've watched a ton of interesting technologies over the years. I remember I won't say depression, but, like, I was so disappointed when blockchain got popular, because, like, anyone with basic
tech,
it's so limited. Right? It's like you have a Merkle DAG and you cut off the ability to merge, and then you have a Merkle tree, which is still pretty useful, and then you cut off the ability to branch. You just get this gimpy little chain, and it's like, well, it's not that useful anymore. And so the idea that, the whole internet's going to be built on block, no, it's not. I can tell you right now, anyone with basic computer science can point out a whole bunch of problems that this data structure does not fit. That's, it can't solve that problem.
And it's not energy efficient. Even NFTs can only hold like a certain size, which is essentially the receipt for the image itself, not the image.
Well, NFTs have a direct analog. It's, naming a star, buying property on the moon.
Yeah,
right?
Naming a star.
It's not, like, we've already done this.
What was that was being advertised everywhere? Where you get like a title, like a Scottish Scottish title. Yeah.
It's like that. So we've already seen this scam minus the tech. And so this is just, it's not AI washing, it's tech washing, taking an old scam, throwing some fancy popular tech at it, and then trying to convince people that this time it's not a scam because tech, right? And the thing that bothers me about all of this, including the current iteration of LLMs, is there are thousands of different data. There's self-organizing maps, there's random forests, there's X and K-means clustering. There's all of these super, super, super cool machine learning algorithms. And not all the research is dead, but like 99% of the money is going into LLM research. And it's like, okay, I mean, those are useful, but they don't solve every problem. And these other algorithms like X means clustering doesn't hallucinate. Self-organizing maps don't hallucinate, right? These are just grouping. These are great if you want to look at data and find weird outliers. Like, I did some advisory work for a company that's they uncovered $1 billion scam at hospitals because they were using self-organizing maps. They were pulling in all the data, kind of like Splunk, and then automatically throwing it into a SOM. And you get all these clusters in this in-dimensional space, and it's like, well, the NICU nurses are here, and the geriatric nurses are here, but wait, what's this? There's this little cluster over here that it's close to the NICU. It is NICU nurses, but why are they pulling geriatric patient records? And it turned out a few nurses were supplementing their pay by finding a deceased patient every shift and selling it on the black market for about $420.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it's... This person's dead. It's a victimless crime, right? Open a new $100,000 credit line on some dude that just died with excellent credit. So anyway, like, there are really, really useful technologies that can be brought to bear in all manner of computer science problems. And it's a shame that everyone's burning all the money. And what's always happened in the past is the funding dries up for everything. right? Like this huge amount of money that's burned on this one technology that can never possibly there is no one technology that does everything. So
Right. That's one of the major contentions that I have with the article, because the article is, granted, it's very satirical, but it's also talking about how there's like possibly, and they have some caveats at the bottom. I had to make sure that I reread that
Okay.
too, but they said, hey, it's not likely that we're going to hit another winter like we did in the past. It might be a soft winter or maybe like an AI autumn. But given this hype cycle, building the measuring stick and saying you are here, they think that we kind of passed the bump and now we're like going to hit the downtrend soon. I don't necessarily agree with that. Part of the reason, and this is why I think more people should learn about AI winters themselves. We had an AI winter back in the 60s. And we had two major AI winters. One was back in the 60s and another one was in about the 80s. And so I think the first one was around like perceptrons, what we know as neural networks. The second one was around, I think, more fuzzy logic or rules-based expert systems.
Wasn't there another symbolic computation thing? Like
there were smaller winters
Okay.
in between, but it was the two big ones where there was a lot of funding. But you look at what happened with those two, a lot of it was DARPA funding, a lot of it was research focused. And so what we have today is private industry. Private industry is the one that's throwing the money in the pot. And we're still seeing practical applications. We're seeing natural I keep wanting to say natural language, or it's natural language processing. What is it?
NLP.
It's like neural linguistic programming.
That's
I keep thinking
the other NLP. Yeah.
Natural language processing.
Very different
There's
thing.
a lot of fantastic stuff. Again, RAG, even without large language models, you can do a lot of really cool things with RAG, the way that operates. It's really fancy search,
We're
essentially.
expanding acronyms. Retrieval augmented generation,
Yeah,
right?
retrieval augmented generation. Take a book, chop it up into tiny bits, and then ask it questions, and you get only the tiny bits that are relevant to the question instead of the whole book at once. So it takes 300 pages and shrinks it down to one page. Makes it so much easier to search through things. But with the large language models, with RAG, even the traditional machine learning systems, we're still seeing a lot of traditional machine learning systems or algorithms being put into some of these additional systems. And it stacks on top of each other. We're seeing a lot of private investment. This is all stuff that we did not see in the previous two major AI winters.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about that. Yeah,
I think winter in this context is going to be I think it's going to be a very relative term. I don't think that we're going, because AI winters, we actually saw a complete dry up of funding.
Yeah,
That is that is a wholesale winter.
yeah.
In this case, what I think that, and this was kind of like one of the issues that I had with the article when I first went through it, is that what they mean by winter isn't that all of the funding dries up like we saw with the other two winters. What they mean by winter is that the overhype is going to go away. So when they were talking about bubble bursting, I don't think the bubble's going to burst. When they were talking about bubble bursting, it's the hype bubble. It's not the AI
I think
bubble.
the funding will drop significantly. I would love if it got reallocated to more, like I said, there's so many of these other machine learning techniques that are really good. But although even with LLMs, like you're talking about with RAG, one of the best things, if anything, if you're going to check the results, it works really well. And I had one friend who's actually using AI in production, or LLMs in production to be precise. And he was explaining, he's like, we have this huge business. They have thousands and thousands of not subsidiaries, but franchises. He's like, you would think that there's a standard form to submit this data that the main, enterprise needs. He's like, there's not. Every single franchise puts it in a different format. And so he was using LLMs to normalize the data. And so when you think about it, we're kind of walking through it with him. I'm like, well, wait a minute, but you're going to have errors. It's not going to do a perfect job. And it's like, yeah, but maintaining 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 individual parsers with a huge team of people is going to be super expensive, and it's also going to have a similar error rate. So I was like, oh, actually, yeah, no, this is actually the perfect application for LLMs, is adding some structure to unstructured data that otherwise would be super error prone. It's still going to have errors, but a lot fewer, and the cost and the amount of errors. And if someone just changes their form, the LLM is much more able to deal with those changes much more gracefully than, oh, shoot, this franchise 5327, right? They changed their format again. Hey, who needs to go and update that parser? And we have no data coming in until it's updated. So there are valid use cases where, I do agree with you. It's not the same. Like, this is more useful than previous iterations. more broadly useful, I should
and
say.
more adopted to practical applications than the previous winters as well.
But I guess what I'd like to see is just someone in technology is, can we please stop the hype? The hype is the problem.
I have an article for you.
Go right ahead.
Yeah, it's I will effing pile drive you if you talk about AI again. That's why I wanted to talk about that article first, is because you can't separate the concept of the AI winter for like this current iteration from the AI hype.
Yeah.
I was actually thinking with that example that you gave, I would use it for third-party risk assessments. So when I was working for this bank, I was doing third-party risk assessments, which means that I had to read policy documentation. I had to read your SAQs. I had to read your SOC 2 report, like audit reports. I had to read a lot of information, and then I had to answer a what do we call it? No, it was the SAQ that I had to fill out. No. The SIG, I had to read the SIG. We were using a SIG Lite. Standard information gathering form is basically what it stands for. SAQ is self-assessment questionnaire. So they were doing an SAQ, they were doing a SIG, they were doing the SOC 2 report, they had policies and procedures, they had pen test reports and other information like data classification policies. So I had to read all of that information, and I had to answer in a GRC program, hey, do they have a password policy that matches these requirements? Do they have a data classification that says X, Y, and Z? Do they have these things? Do they have data backups that are a backup site that's at least 50 miles away? Do they have... So I had to answer a lot of questions. LLMs would have been perfect, so I could pump all that information into a RAG system, get it to basically ask itself those questions, and then fill out that questionnaire for me. So to give you an idea, I would go through, on average, about 3 companies a day. And so if we built an automated system, that's something where we could go through like 100 companies in a week. Easy.
Yeah.
I went through 300 in the year.
Which, so like one a day, roughly, with some breaks.
On average, yeah.
But, I mean, yes, like we talked about, once they get the hallucinations or confabulations, which is not catching on, but it's a better term, once they get those down, then totally. I think that's an excellent use of LLMs.
Again, RAG is great for that. RAG significantly reduces the likelihood of hallucinations. And then you can have it cite information, so you can always have a human in the loop checking the work. But instead of, doing everything from scratch, it's now what was a 4-hour job turns into like a 20-minute job.
Yeah, and I've seen some interesting stuff. It ties in actually what we were talking about in the first half of this episode, forgetting. There is actually some research on feeding data in to cancel it out, to actually forget inaccurate data in these models. I've seen like one paper on that, which would be super useful.
Yeah, I need to know more about that paper because I can see it in terms of context windows. I can't see it in terms of training data.
Yeah. So again, open area of research. I think we've covered this fairly well. Like, again, the hype, just please stop with the hype. Whatever you hype to this level will never live up. It's a great way. It's a scam. It's literally a con game. You are building people's confidence to a level that is unrealistic, that nothing short of a deity could ever live up to. And then you run away with all the money, and the people who spent all the money get pissed because they wasted money on something it can't do everything, which nothing can.
You know what's funny is that I'm actually a little more optimistic about the hype. I'm not... Hype is bad, yes, but I'm not worried about the AI hype. I think that the people who are losing the most in AI are the investors. And it's because they're the ones that they don't really know what they're looking for. It's advanced technology, or at least it can be explained with technobabble to the point where, like, hey, throw money at it. Sounds like we know what we're doing. We're going to build this system. And then investors throw money at it, and then nothing useful comes out of it. So I'm not as worried about the hype. I'm worried about, hey, people, just understand AI is not going to solve all of your problems. If somebody ever tries to tell you it's going to solve all your problems, like, that doesn't pass the sniff test, raise an eyebrow or walk away. Yeah. If somebody is honest with you and says, here are the limitations, here's what we do to try and get past these limitations, then focus on that.
Yes.
So that is something where you can educate investors. That is something where you can educate users. That is something where you can educate the populace on a very technical topic in a non-technical way.
I will take it farther than that. So I agree with you.
Okay.
That is one thing you should definitely do. Are you talking to sales or engineers, right? What are the downsides, just like you said. But to take it even farther, have you seen Randall Munroe's Thing Explainer?
I have not.
wonderful book that talks about rockets and locks and all kinds of things
Okay.
using like the 1,000 most common words in the English language. And it's
Oh, that's
really
cool.
Yeah, it's really hard because
Yeah.
like, what's a lock? How do you if you can't use the word key and you can't use the word lock and you can't like, how do you explain what a lock is? And we finally like he has an aside where he talked about how do you explain a lock using only these words?
Have you
and
ever read Code?
which one?
It's a book. It's just called Code.
No,
It starts off
not with
talking
that
about
name.
like Morse code.
Oh,
And then it
interesting.
gets into, hey, here's a couple wires, a light bulb, and a battery, and here's how you make a circuit. But then, like, what if we put something in between there, and now we have transistors, and then we have repeaters?
I read something like that from No Starch Press, but I don't think it was called
It's not
Code.
No Starch. It's
Okay.
not No Starch. Yeah,
Yeah.
It's a book. It's called Code. I can't remember who it's by, but it's a really good book. Highly recommend it. But it sounds very similar to that. And so, like, if I had to explain a lock and a key without using the words lock and key,
Yeah.
I would start with the story. Honestly, I would say, hey, here's something that you would normally, because that was the thing. The way that this book Code explained Morse code was really interesting. It's like, hey, you're 8 years old and it's bedtime, right? It's 8 p.m., it's bedtime, lights out. Okay. But you still want to have conversations with your friend. And your friend lives across the street. And so you have a flashlight and you're flashing the light at your friend. But then you and your friend make up this code in order to translate the flashes on the lights into something legible, but it has to be efficient. So you need to look at common words and common letters, and then you sort them that way. So like a single dot is an E, like a long dot is an S. And so this is how you build out your alphabet, not by A is 1 dot, B is 2 dots, C is 3 dots, by frequency of letters, because you're going to come across that letter more commonly. And so the way they explain it is really, really great. They talk about repeaters where it's like, hey, you work at a company that handles essentially the telegram, but the telegram wire can only go so far. And so what happens is you're in a station in the middle of nowhere, and you'll see tap, 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 tick on one end, and then you have to repeat that same pattern on the other end so that it hits a new wire, and then it continues down the way. Well, you're incredibly lazy, and you don't want to have to do that because it's very boring out there. So you just tie a stick to it. So when it gets tap, 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 tick on one side, it's going to type tap, 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 tick on the other side. And so that's why I would start with the story. So it's like, all right, cool. You have a door. You want to go in your house, out of your house, but sometimes you don't want other people to get in or out of your house. Or, you have a really excitable dog that just like likes to lay on the door handle.
Yeah.
And so you want to make sure that the door stays closed even when somebody's trying to pull the door handle. So you create a little mechanism that, see, I'm already like just getting these creative juices going. Like it would be a lot of fun to play with that.
So that's good. He actually ends up using 2 words.
And what are the 2 words?
Shape checker.
I can see that for key.
Yeah. It checks the shape. The lock checks the shape of the key. He uses pins and all that, but is it the right shape? You get to open the door. If it's the wrong shape, right? So I would say, like, to everything you're saying about ask, what are the downsides? But also, one thing that would have cut out all of the last 4 major hype cycles, explain it to me in common language. If whatever you're trying to sell me as an investor, if you cannot explain it in common language without jargon, you're probably bullshitting me. You probably don't even understand what you're trying to sell me.
I think that might be tricky because you can explain it and oversimplify the idea.
Okay.
So you can oversimplify and say like, oh, the AI. This is why we push back every time somebody says like, oh, the AI thinks. It's like, no, it doesn't.
It thinks it's right.
Complex text prediction. That's what LLMs are.
The AI thinks in the same way that humans think, the same way a submarine swims, the way a submarine swims.
Yeah.
The way humans, swimming. Submarines don't swim. They move through the water.
No. I want to see submarines with big biceps just doing a freestyle through the ocean. Imagine that thing coming towards you. You're on a Navy vessel, and you just see this thing just...
Much more imposing military if it had big, muscly arms. That would...
yeah. I want big, muscly arms. I want a swim cap on the submarine.
Kind of the Trogdor,
and like a head that
Trogdor
swivels.
submarine.
Yeah, Trogdor. Just one big, beefy arm.
Probably just go in a circle, though. You need 2. So... But no, I think jargon is a efficient way of encapsulating lots of information in very few words for those of us in an industry. But I think anything can be explained in simple terms. It just takes longer.
I agree with that completely. Yeah. It's, oh, man, you know what? All right. So this is super nerd stuff coming out for a second. I actually want to get a calculus textbook. I've been talking to enough people about calculus, and you're going to see why this makes sense in a second. But I've been talking to enough people about calculus, and I kind of want to get a calculus textbook and like just kind of go back through it and be like, all right, I know I didn't care in class, but like, what if I actually cared just a little bit? The reason why I bring up calculus is because calculus is incredibly complex, but it's also math. So it's kind of hard to say like it's wrong. You know, there's a right answer essentially that you get to, but I use it for analogs in other areas. I think of complex things as calculus. Like if you are going to explain something complex like calculus in simple terms, there's still a lot of background that you need to go over. And so that's why it takes longer.
Yeah.
There are shortcuts that you can make, but then those shortcuts start to fall apart the more precise and the deeper you get into that topic.
That's exactly it, right? Is these complex terms have that background. The famous ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, right? Three words that are paragraphs worth of stuff. So
what does that mean?
If I remember right, it is the changes as something as something develops from embryo to actually living being, the changes it goes through, it looks like the same set of changes that evolution over time, took to get us there.
I see.
And so I forget where I got that from, but it's a famous 3 words it takes almost a paragraph or two to describe what's going on in 3 words. So I'm sure there's other things that are equally linguistically dense. You look at some of the academic papers.
Language can get real interesting.
Yeah. So, anyway, some other time for those who want to go deeper.
We'll talk about language.
Look up Claude Shannon. Yeah, theory of information.
There you go.
That might actually be interesting to look at how does theory of information tie into, not just NLP, but machine learning in general.
Mm-hmm. And even just human understanding of how these systems work. There was somebody that you were trying to help before we hopped on this call and started doing the podcast that it looked like they didn't really understand what they needed to do for their Python homework. It was like intro to Python homework. And I think one of the challenges was that they didn't understand the different like base data types. And so you and I had a whole little discussion talking about like, oh, well, he doesn't know how to find things. And it's like, okay, but like, what do you Google when you don't know what you're looking at? And then once you do a Google, here's a result page. What does that result mean? It's like if you were to look up something in the medical space, right? Yeah. What's a protrusion? What's an itis?
Or contusion.
Yeah,
what does that mean?
Exactly,
right?
Exactly. And so you need to know to ask that in Google in order to find it. And then once you find the answer page, like how do you interpret a lot of stuff? So during COVID, I was reading a lot of medical journals and they were talking about hazard ratios. I'm like, what the heck is a hazard ratio? Like I've had to write a number of articles, but I've never come across this. It's in the medical context specifically. Hazard ratios are what is the likelihood or the risk of harm for a treatment versus no treatment.
So this is the flip side-ish of number to treat, or NTT, which is not really discussed outside of actual literature.
Not familiar with that term, but the idea is like if you have the flu, right? Like there's a risk to having the flu, right? Risk to health in a generalized term. Like you might not die from it, but like complications can. Yeah,
especially if
you
it's the
can.
Spanish one.
You can, but even regular flu. Regular flu kills people every year.
Yeah.
But complications can happen. So I don't want to use death because that's overly simplifying. But like basically, can you go home and sleep it off? There's a risk to that. And say like, all right, maybe there's a 2% risk that you're going to get harmed by that. But then like if you get this treatment, there's a risk to that treatment. There's no such thing as a free lunch. So then like maybe there's a 1% risk to that. So you have a 2% risk versus a 1% risk. The 1% risk makes the most sense. And so that's why that treatment is used.
Also, the thing to take in, again, is NTT, number to treat. So given this intervention...
I'm just illustrating hazard ratios.
Yeah.
But hazard ratios, if you don't know what that is and you come across that in an answer page, then you're stuck. So even if you're going to look something up, you need to know a little bit of the background, a little bit of the basics. And that goes back to what I was saying about calculus. Like,
and you do need to be able to...
layers on top of itself.
Like that's where I find LLMs to be super useful is I've kept using them after doing the presentation earlier in the year because I can describe here's what I'm looking for, and it can at least get me in the neighborhood so I know what search terms to look for. So I don't trust the output directly, but it gives me the search terms. It short circuits that whole, let me search for 30 to 60 minutes to find out what the heck the search terms I need to look for are to finally get the good stuff. And I can be like, hey, I'm looking for, how do I do this, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, here's the term, sweet. And I punch those in, and now within like 5 minutes, I have the high quality results. But the problem is, like, to go back to, some of the students I've helped in the last 2 to 3 years, just sitting with them, I'm like, hey, can you describe that for me? What are you expecting to happen? And there's a lot of, I guess I'll call it entropic learning.
You and your big words.
Yeah, where it's basically, the old, what if 1,000 monkeys had 1,000 typewriters, like given enough time, they should create Shakespeare. Like some kids try to learn this way. And it's so disheartening to see because they're just trying random stuff. They'll just throw words at you that they heard in the context of computers. And you're like, no. Like, I mean, if you were a computer and you could try billions of these a second and just throw as garbage at me, billions of times a second, yeah, you'd probably figure it out in a few minutes.
Yep.
But you're a human. It's going to take you multiple lifetimes to get anywhere near an answer that's vaguely correct. Like, and I've had this, finally, after this happened the first few times, I'm like, we need a causality-based approach. What is our goal? And then how can we work toward that goal? We need to understand, I want this to happen. Therefore, I need to do this. And in order for that to happen, I need to do this, and so on. And it's insane because people are acting more like machines or LLMs where they're just throwing garbage at the wall, hoping some of it sticks. And I think this was happening before LLMs got big.
It's
so I'm not
definitely happening before LLMs
I'm not blaming
got
this
big.
on AI. I think this has more to do with our school system than anything.
I mean, there's a whole
AI-related.
website talking about that called Let Me Google That For You. It's
Oh,
fun
yeah.
to send to people. It's fun to send to people.
Yeah.
How do I do this? It's like, oh, that's a good question. Check this link out.
What was it? lmgtfy.org or whatever.
Yeah,
You
that's
just send them
exactly
the
it.
link,
That's exactly
and then
it.
it just pops it into a
It
pre-filled
pops up
Google
a
thing.
Google page and then a cursor that just clicks there, types it out, and then clicks search.
Yeah, not the nicest link to send, but useful. Well, it used to be.
At a certain point, niceties, you can kind of skirt those a little bit for a second. Be a little stern.
It's gonna
be a little more direct.
an interesting next few decades going to be real interesting.
I don't know. I think, again, I'm optimistic. I think it's going to be, now that I think about it, as far as what I want to say, I think that the next few decades are going to be very positive, but we're also going to see a lot of negatives. I see a separation of people that can and people that can't. And that separation is widening.
Yes.
That terrifies me.
And I also worry, you talk about positivity, and I thought COVID taught us, I think it might be very positive with regard to H5N1.
Is that a new one?
It's the bird flu. We've been talking about that since at least the first go round of SARS, before SARS-CoV-2.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we've learned anything. I mean, at least the vaccination rates have stabilized now. They're not plummeting still.
I don't.
But yeah, it's.
I'm not going to get into the politics of it all. I do think that we learned a lot of negative lessons, but sticking with technology. That's
the problem right there, right? I mentioned vaccination, and that immediately triggers people as a political issue. That had always been just a science public health issue. There was no politics involved. That's my concern. Politics is now infused and suffused everything. There isn't a non-political issue, and there are some issues that just should be just decided on facts, which we used to agree what facts were and share a reality. And there's too much stuff now that is a political issue, and that's the concern.
Yeah, we can talk about that off of the podcast because I have some thoughts that I'd like to run by you. But yeah, I mean, sticking more with technology, one of the reasons why I'm optimistic for the future is because I do see a lot of very smart people kind of coming out of the woodwork. We've seen a lot of progress in the open source side of things. There's some YouTubers that I don't religiously follow, but I've learned so much from them because they didn't exist until about a year ago, and they're in the data science space or they're in the technology space, and they're like, look, only reason I started a YouTube channel is because so many people are talking about this, and I figured I might as well talk about this because this is like my little area that I know a lot about. And so here we are. And then they get 100,000 subscribers and they're like, oh, maybe I do have something worth saying. I'm always, all right, so I talk at conferences, and I really encourage people to talk at conferences, because the difference between people who talk at conferences and people who don't talk at conferences is whether or not you submit a CFP. That's it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of CFP boards that are saying, like, we need more people that submit CFPs because we keep getting mediocre talks.
I kind of wish
you're tired of mediocre talks.
That's a good point.
You need to submit a CFP, and that was something that encouraged me.
Yeah.
A video that I recommend anybody to listen to. It's a video. It's from I think it's from one of the B-sides, or it's actually Circle City Con. I remember now. It's Circle City Con. It's called Talkie Horror Picture Show.
Yeah. Nice.
It's a good video. It's from somebody on the CFP board talking about why you should apply for a CFP, even if you think you have nothing worth saying.
Yeah. Well, to end on that, since we're coming up on the time here, there is a YouTube channel that I found. I forget how, and it has become one of my favorites. And I think the information is actually, I haven't seen. I kind of like nature shows. I grew up watching a lot of PBS as a kid, and just seeing National Geographic.
Is it True Facts?
True Facts is amazing.
True
it's not
Facts
that
is
one. That
hilarious.
is amazing. That has turned into better. So that and Casual Geographic.
Yes,
right.
Casual Geographic.
Both of these, neither of these guys have a background. I was looking into Casual Geographic. I'm like, is he like a zoologist? Like, how does he get
He's
research?
just a huge fan of animals,
right? And a lot of his stuff is Smithsonian, National Geographic. It is good sources, and he just started doing that during the pandemic because he was bored.
He was on TikTok.
Yeah. And both of these, the level of detail they've now gotten into, like True Facts, a lot of that is based off like preprint stuff directly from academics that hasn't even hit the proper publication channels yet. And Casual Geographic, I have learned things on that channel, and it may not be everyone's style, but I love it. I love just some of the names that he comes up with for animals.
There's another one from an actual zoologist that I can't remember the name. I can't remember her name. But you can see her. She's usually wearing like a beanie, has like a nose piercing. Like, she is hilarious, but also started on TikTok. Again, like, so many people started on TikTok during the pandemic. It's like Vine when that first came out.
Yeah.
I loved old school Vine. And speaking of which, one of the people that we mentioned earlier, Drew Gooden, like, he came from Vine.
Oh, did he? Interesting.
Yeah.
His video, like I said, there's some good stuff. So yeah, I guess that is our bright spot. Is in some ways we have definitely democratized production of content. Now, I guess the big challenge is, can we claw it back from advertising-based models? Because those seem to go badly most, if not all of the time. And there are technologies. Everyone immediately says, well, how are you going to pay for it? Well, you just make it decentralized. Like, we've already seen BitTorrent take over the internet. That's a whole separate discussion. I've given other talks on that. But there are ways to not have advertising pay for everything and keep it a little more focused and pure as to what it should actually be. Because, yeah, there's some amazing creators, let alone the ones that have actual science background. There's some really good science communicators with PhDs that are doing some really in-depth stuff. Yeah. But like I said, yeah, True Facts, Casual Geographic. Like, it's funny because True Facts started as half false, and now it's like the tone is the same, but like most of it's actually true stuff at this point.
Like, what if we did goofy stuff but actually like educated people?
Yeah, like their one on sea urchins and echinoderms is mind blowing.
I think the first one that I ever came across was talking about ducks and duck penises, and I was just like, what am I listening to?
Still one of my favorite. Today we will discuss the chamalalion.
Yeah.
It's like, wait, the chameleon, that's how you say it? He's like, oh, that's not that fun.
All right. So with that, thanks for tuning in. This is Gavin
and Elio
signing off.
See you next time.